Boss be rising, BBTV's igniting, turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited, from the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss be rising, sky ain't even the ceiling, when she hits go live, everybody feels it.
Hey, welcome back. Guess what? It's Saturday night. Are you as boring as I am? I bet you are. So tonight on Jukebox Journey, we're continuing something I've really been enjoying this month, and that's our Women's History Month. And it's a look at the women who helped shape rock music. Because if you look back at the history of this genre, it's easy to think rock has always been dominated by men, guitars, loud attitudes. But the truth is, women have been a part of the backbone of rock since the very beginning. Long before arena tours and platinum records, there was Sister Rosetta Tharpe absolutely shredding an electric guitar in the 1940s and 50s, and basically laying the groundwork for what would become rock and roll. Then you move forward and you get voices like Janis Joplin, who didn't just sing rock music. She tore through it like a force of nature. Later, you had artists like Stevie Nicks bringing mystique and songwriting power into the mainstream. Pat Benatar proving that a female voice could stand toe-to-toe with the loudest guitars on the planet. And the Wilson sisters from Heart, showing everyone that women could dominate both the vocals and the musicianship in a rock band. Now, as the decades moved forward, that list kept growing. Chrissie Hynde with the Pretenders brought punk attitude into rock songwriting. Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries introduced a voice that sounded like nobody else on this earth. Amy Lee from Evanescence, she helped carry heavy rock into the 2000s with a completely different kind of vocal power. And that's the thing about women in rock. They rarely sound the same as the generation before them, right? So every time a new voice breaks through, it changes the landscape just a little bit. Which brings us to the mid 2000s, when a band from Texas suddenly showed up on rock radio with a song that didn't sound like anything else being played at the time. The band, it was Flyleaf. Yes, another one of my Texas natives here. The song was I'm So Sick. Come on, y'all. You know you love that intro. Seriously. And the voice behind it, it belongs to Lacey Sturm. Excuse me. And if you remember hearing that song for the first time, you probably remember exactly what it felt like, because it started quiet and tense and then suddenly exploded into this storm of guitars and her vocals that sounded raw and emotional and almost desperate in the best possible way. You know, it wasn't polished radio rock. It wasn't trying to be pretty. It sounded like someone pouring real emotion straight into the microphone, and rock audiences tend to recognize that kind of honesty immediately. But Flyleaf's story isn't just about a band that had a big break moment. It's about how that moment happened, what the band was trying to say. Shh. Sorry, puppy dogs. With their music, and the choices that eventually led them down a very different path that most people expected. Because if you follow rock, excuse me, my dog's trying to get on camera. No, lay down. That's enough. If you have a big 95-pound dog, make sure he knows who his alpha is. Yeah, that's me. Anyway, so if you follow rock long enough, you'll notice something. The bands that feel the most real usually have the most complicated stories behind them, right? And Flyleaf is definitely one of those bands. So tonight, we're going to talk about how they started, why their music connected with so many people, and of course, the question that a lot of fans still ask years later: what the hell actually happened to Flyleaf? Huh? Does anybody know? I don't think anybody knows at this point. All right, let me load up this story here. So, the big question: what the hell did happen to Flyleaf? We're just going to rip the band aid off and start with the question every rock fan eventually asks when they go back and listen to that mid 2000s wave of alternative rock. What the hell happened? Because if you were listening to rock radio around 2005, you remember exactly how this band showed up. 1 minute, you're hearing the usual lineup of post grunge bands dominating the airwaves. The next minute, this track called I'm So Sick starts circulating, and it sounds completely different from the rest of the playlist. The intro is quiet and tense, and then suddenly it explodes into guitars and one of the most intense female rock vocals anyone has heard in a long time. Hi, Junior. How are you? So that voice belonged to Lacey. And almost overnight, that voice became the entire identity of the band. I mean, how could it not? Now, here's the part a lot of people don't know. Flyleaf didn't actually start as Flyleaf. The band originally formed in Texas, repping home here, under the passerby or the name passerby. They were doing exactly what thousands of young rock bands do, playing local shows, writing songs, trying to figure out who they were musically. And they were hoping someone in the industry eventually would notice them. The turning point came when Lacey joined the group. She didn't sound like the typical female rock singer of the time. She wasn't trying to be polished radio pop rock, and she wasn't doing the gothic opera thing that a lot of bands were chasing after. Like Evanescence, they broke huge. Lacey sounded raw. She sounded emotional. She sounded like somebody who actually meant every word she was singing. And rock audiences pick up on that authenticity immediately. When the band changed their name from Passerby to Flyleaf and started gaining traction, that sound was already forming. Then, in 2005, they released their self-titled debut album, and that one single solitary album is the record that built the band's entire legacy. Songs like I'm So Sick and Fully Alive, All Around Me is my favorite, all came from that same record. And those tracks connected with listeners in a way that felt personal instead of manufactured. So the band suddenly had a growing fan base. They were touring constantly. And for a moment, it looked like Flyleaf was going to be one of those defining female fronted rock bands of that entire era. But here's where the story starts getting complicated. Because while the music was blowing up, another conversation started following the band everywhere they went. And it had nothing to do with the guitars or the stage show. It had to do with the lyrics. People began noticing that the themes in Flyleaf songs, they were different from the typical anger-driven rock lyrics of that time. The songs talked about pain and survival, redemption and identity. And you know what? Trying to find meaning after hitting rock bottom. A lot of that came directly from Lacey's own life story. She had gone through some extremely dark periods growing up, including severe depression and um, an attempt on her own life as a teenager. And the music she wrote with the band was shaped by the experience of surviving that and trying to rebuild her life afterwards. Because you know what? Lacey was also open about her Christian faith. The band quickly became surrounded by the question that would follow them for years. Were they a Christian band or a rock band? The band themselves always pushed back on that label. They toured with mainstream rock acts. They played the same festivals as everyone else in the alternative scene, and they never marketed themselves as a religious group. But the emotional themes in the lyrics made a lot of listeners connect with the music in a deeper way that, typical radio rock. That honesty, pardon me, keeps helped the debut album travel far beyond what anyone ever expected from a new band. So Flyleaf suddenly had songs climbing rock charts, fans showing up at shows across the country, and the reputation for performances that were intense and emotional instead of just loud. But success in rock music comes with a life that most people never see from the outside. Touring means living on buses, waking up in different cities every single night, repeating the same emotional songs over and over, while thousands of people expect you to deliver the same intensity every single time. For a band whose music came from such personal experiences, that pressure eventually started to wear down the person at the center of it. And that's the part of the Flyleaf story that a lot of people didn't see coming. Because after years of touring and building a career that looked like it was just getting started, Lacey made a decision that shocked the band's fans. In 2012, she announced she was leaving Flyleaf. Not because of a huge backstage fight, not because the band was falling apart, but because the life of nonstop touring and industry pressure was pulling her away from the life she actually wanted to live. She wanted to focus on her family. She wanted stability. She wanted something different from the cycle of recording albums and living on the road. And that moment is the one that made so many people start asking the question we started with tonight. What the hell happened to Flyleaf? Because when the voice that defined the band walks away, it forces everyone to rethink what the band actually was in the first place. So, the part of the story people always get wrong. Now, once Flyleaf broke out with that first album, the band didn't just get attention for the music. They got attention for something that confused the hell out of the rock world for years. And that was the question that followed them everywhere. Every single place they went. Are these guys a Christian rock band or not? Because if you go back to that moment in the mid 2000s, radio, rock radio, and the music industry loved categories. I think they kind of still do. They liked being able to say this band goes here, that band goes there, this station plays these artists, and that station plays those. But Flyleaf didn't cooperate with that system, not at all. Musically, they were clearly part of the mainstream alternative rock scene. They toured with the same heavy rock bands everyone else was touring with. They played the same festivals. They were on the same rock radio stations as bands like Breaking Benjamin and 3 Days Grace. But if you listen closely to the lyrics, there is something different going on. A lot of Flyleaf songs were about surviving pain, fighting your way out of darkness, trying to rebuild yourself when life falls apart. And those themes, mm, they were coming directly from the life of Lacey, who had been very open about the struggles she went through growing up. Now, here's where the confusion started. Lacey also talked open openly about her Christian faith and how that helped her rebuild her life after those dark years. And the moment that detail entered the conversation, the internet basically lost its mind trying to figure out what Flyleaf was supposed to be. Now, if you've ever listened to the intro of I'm So Sick, you can probably understand why they were questioning anything. I mean, come on. Have you ever heard a woman scream like that on cue, on pitch? I mean, come on. So, yeah. And, for years now, they've said, oh, rock is the devil music, right? No, it's not. It's most certainly not. I bet you God can rock to some, I don't know, Leonard Skinner sometimes, right? So some rock fans immediately assumed the band must be a Christian rock group because of the themes in the lyrics. Then, of course, the other half is thinking, wow, she's the devil. So a lot of Christian audiences, they weren't sure what to do with a band that sounded this heavy and intense. The truth was a lot simpler than the arguments people were having online, though. Flyleaf themselves repeatedly said they were not trying to be labeled a Christian band. They were just writing songs about real experiences. Those experiences happened to include faith, but they also included pain and anger and confusion and the struggle to stay alive emotionally. You know what? And that honesty is exactly what made the songs connect with such a wide audience. Because you didn't have to share the same beliefs to understand what it felt like to hit rock bottom and try to climb back out again. When songs like Fully Alive or All Around Me, when they hit, listeners heard vulnerability in the lyrics. That didn't feel like it had been written by a committee. It felt like someone telling the truth about what they had lived through. And that's something rock audiences respond to immediately. Admit it. I mean, you can't tell me you go to a Guar concert and you don't feel like getting in that mosh pit. And then as soon as you're done, sure, you may be aching for the next couple of weeks, but you feel better, don't you? Letting out those aggressions through music. It's a great way. I mean, there's music for every mood, isn't there? Blues, R&B, rock and roll, country. I mean, there's always a tear in my beer. So the interesting thing is that weird middle ground actually helped Flyleaf grow instead of limiting them. They had rock fans who loved the music for its intensity and emotion. Pick me. And they had listeners who connected with the spiritual themes in the lyrics. Two completely different audiences were finding their way to the same songs for different reasons. That's not something that happens very often in the music world, especially when it comes to Christian and rock, right? So most bands end up stuck in one scene or one category, whether they like it or not. Flyleaf managed to exist somewhere between those two worlds. Crazy. Where did they go, though, right? But that balancing act also meant the band was constantly surrounded by debates and assumptions, that had very little to do with the music. People wanted to argue about labels instead of listening to what the songs were actually saying. Meanwhile, the band just kept touring, writing music, building a fan base that felt understood by the emotion in those records. And for a few years, it worked. The band released their second album, Memento Mori, in 2009 and continued to grow their audience. They were still touring heavily and still showing up on rock charts, still building a reputation as one of the most emotionally intense live bands of that era. But behind the scenes, the lifestyle that came with that success was starting to take its toll on the person whose voice had carried the band into the spotlight in the first place. That's the moment when the Flyleaf story takes the turn that nobody expected. And we will get right back to that in just a few minutes. I'm going to take a short break.
She came from the quiet storms, built a fire from the ground, turned a whisper to a warning. Now her voice shakes the town. Every setback was a lesson, every doubt became a key, unlocking something bigger. That's the rise of Boss B. When the lights go low, her vision hits high. She built a whole damn network off a promise and a try. Every sunrise, every moment, she's stacking legacy. This ain't just a channel, this is BBTV. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. She's the queen of the comeback, the storm in the street, crafting stories out of heartbeats, making visions out of dreams. Got thunder in the hustle, got a voice that cuts clean. Every mic she touches turns to power unseen. So let brothers spin the numbers, let the views rise slow or fast. Boss B doesn't measure wins by echoes of the past. This moment is a pivot, this season's history. Bow down to the founder of the BBTV dynasty. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. She's got fire in the head, it's got truth in the frame, got a heart that won't retire and a gift you can't name. Every loop, every letter, every dream she sets free, it's a love note to the world sign. Boss B. And the world keeps watching as the numbers climb, but she's counting all the moments, not the dollar signs. From the late night grind to the daylight scene, she's building something bigger than the algorithm's dream. Boss B rising, BBTV shining. Her story's rewriting, a legacy in real time. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. BBTV, where the stories breathe. BBTV, where the dreamers believe. Boss B rising, watch her take her place. This is BBTV, this is her grace.
Hey there, Patty friend. Thank you for listening, honey. I'm sorry. I know you're tired. I'm a little late today. I have baby butt this weekend, so it's been a little bit hectic on me. I'm glad to see you, though, sweetheart. Get some rest. I love you. All right, let's get back to Flyleaf. So, the moment that everything changed. So, now we get to the moment that really made people start asking the question again, what the hell happened to Flyleaf? Because by the time the band reached the early 2010s, they had already done what most rock bands spent their entire careers trying to accomplish. They had a recognizable sound, a loyal fan base, and a front woman whose voice people could identify with in seconds. After the success of their first album in 2005 and the follow-up record Memento Mori in 2009, the band they kept moving forward with heavy touring and writing new material, and in 2012 they released yet another album called New Horizons. Now, on the surface, everything still looked like it was working. The band was active, the music was still reaching listeners, and fans expected the story to continue exactly the way it had been going. Mm-mm. Behind the scenes, something was changing for Lacey again. For years, she had been living the life that comes with being in successful touring rock bands, right? Constant travel, constant performances, constant pressure to deliver the same emotional intensity night after night in front of thousands of people. And for a singer, wait, before I say anything else, I know this sounds bad, but I would love to have those problems. Okay. 12 years of voice lessons, and I've done nothing. Ugh. And for a singer whose music came from such a deeply personal experience. Listen, she that lifestyle eventually started to feel overwhelming to her. In October of 2012, Lacey announced that she was leaving Flyleaf. The news shocked fans because the voice of Flyleaf had become so tightly connected to the identity of the entire band that people couldn't imagine the group without her. The first reaction from a lot of fans was suspicion. And don't we do that with any band that ever disbands or loses somebody? People assume, and that's a bad thing, but they assume there must have been some huge argument inside the band or some kind of backstage drama that forced the split. But the reality was much quieter than that. Lacey explained that her decision came from a desire to step away from the pressures of the music industry and to focus on her family and her faith and building a life that felt stable instead of constantly moving. That makes you wonder, would you really want those problems? Sure, I'd love to be famous, but maybe not like that. You never know. So she wasn't walking away because the band was falling apart. She was walking away because the lifestyle that came with the band no longer felt like the life she wanted to live. That decision, it created a difficult situation for the remaining members of Flyleaf. Of course it did. They had spent years building the band together, and now they had to decide whether the band itself could survive without the voice that had defined it. So eventually they made the choice to continue and introduced a new vocalist named Kristen May. So Kristen joined the band and recorded the album Between the Stars, bringing her own vocal style to the group. But the moment the lineup changed, became public, the fan base kind of split almost instantly. Because whenever a band replaces its singer, it raises one of the oldest debates in rock history. What actually makes a band the band? Is it the musicians who write the songs, or is it the voice that carries those songs to the audience? Some listeners were open to hearing the new version of Flyleaf and supported the band moving forward. Others, they felt that the emotional core of the band had always been tied to Lacey's voice and that chemistry of the original lineup. It couldn't really be replaced. And this is a debate that has happened countless times in rock music. Some bands survive singer changes and become even bigger, like Iron Maiden. There you go. Other bands, oh, Journey too. Hey, there you go. There's another one. Other bands never quite feel the same again, really. But regardless of which side bands landed on, one thing was already clear by that point in the story. The impact of Flyleaf's early years had already secured their place in the history of 2000s alternative rock. Those songs had connected with listeners who felt like the music understood the struggles they were going through in their own lives. And I mean, think about the lyrics to some of the songs. And I can't repeat them, but in All Around Me, I can feel you all around me. Who does that sound like? Think about it. So once that connection, happens, the legacy of those songs tend to stick around long after the lineup itself begins to change. And she was in her own mind in most cases singing about God. Circling the air I'm breathing, it's think about it. So the part that people don't expect, that part is the Flyleaf story that a lot of people never actually hear. Because when bands go through a split like that so publicly, it usually assumes the story is over. The singer leaves, the band fades out, and everyone moves on. But the Flyleaf story didn't really end there. I mean, I'm still listening to the music. I just put out a short today because, yeah. So after leaving the band in 2012, Lacey didn't disappear from music entirely. She stepped away from the Flyleaf machine, began focusing on a very different path that included writing and speaking and eventually releasing solo music that reflected the same personal themes that had shaped the original Flyleaf songs. Meanwhile, the remaining members of Flyleaf continued for a time with Kristen May as their vocalist and released the album Between the Stars. But as the years went by, the band slowed down. Touring became less frequent. New releases stopped coming as often. Like many bands from that era, Flyleaf gradually slipped into a quieter phase where the name still existed, but the momentum of the earlier years had faded. And during that time, something interesting happened with the band's reputation. Those early songs, they didn't disappear. If anything, they continued finding new listeners. I'm So Sick, All Around Me, and Fully Alive kept showing up on playlists, rock stations, and streaming platforms, reaching people who'd never, ever been around when the band first broke. So that's one of the strange things about music in the modern era. A band can step away from the spotlight and the songs can still keep traveling. I wager that's a lot like you have a YouTube channel, you work your tail off for the first few years, you really get your followers up, and then finally you can set it and forget it, kind of. Something happened that surprised a lot of longtime fans of Flyleaf too. Years after leaving the band, Lacey, she reunited with Flyleaf for live performances again. The voice that had defined the band in the beginning was suddenly back on stage with the musicians who helped create those songs in the first place. And for so many fans, it felt like the story had come full circle. Because when you step back and you look at the entire arc of Flyleaf, what you see isn't just a band that showed up fast and faded. You see a group that captured a moment in rock music when listeners were craving something emotional and real, and a singer whose voice carried that emotion in a way that people connected with deeply. Bands change, members leave, careers shift in directions that nobody expects, but the songs that mattered during those moments when everything came together, they don't really disappear. They become part of the soundtrack for the people who needed them when they first heard them. And that's the real answer to the question we started with tonight. What the hell happened to Flyleaf? The band evolved. The people inside it made different choices about their lives. But the music that made listeners stop and pay attention in the first place is still out there doing exactly what it was doing back in 2005, reminding people that sometimes the most powerful voices in rock aren't the ones that sound perfect. They're the ones that, well, they sound honest. And I think that's probably the better sound, if you ask me. Nobody asked me, did they? Now, I'd really like to hear what you think about this story down there in the comments, if you don't mind. Definitely, please hit that thumbs up for me. And hey, subscribe because I'm here all the time. So, look, when you step back and look at the story of Flyleaf, what you really see is a band that made some very deliberate choices about the kind of life they wanted to live. And that's something that doesn't always get talked about very much in rock music. The mythology of rock and roll usually tells us that bands should chase the spotlight forever, keep touring, keep recording, keep pushing forward no matter what it costs. But the people inside those bands are still human beings. And sometimes the life that looks exciting from the outside isn't the life they actually want to live forever. Look, Flyleaf reached a moment where the path in front of them could have kept going exactly the way it had been going. More touring, more records, more years inside the machinery of the music industry. Instead, the people in the band, they made choices that reflected their own priorities. Lacey, she stepped away to focus on her family, her faith, and building a life that felt grounded instead of constantly moving. The rest of the band chose to keep making music for a while and explore where the project might go in a different voice. And years later, those paths crossed again when Lacey reunited with the band for performances that reminded fans why those early songs meant so much to them in the first place. That's one of the most fascinating things about music history for me. Not every story ends with the band becoming bigger and bigger forever. Sometimes the story is about people deciding what matters most in their lives and choosing a completely different direction that reflects that. But the music they create during those moments, when everything comes together, it doesn't disappear. Those songs are still out there. People still discover them, people still connect with them. And if a song helped someone survive a difficult moment in their life, that impact doesn't fade just because the band eventually changed course. So when we ask, what happened to Flyleaf, the real answer is simple. The people who created the music, they chose the lives they wanted to live. And the songs they left behind kept traveling long after the spotlight moved on. And honestly, those are the kind of problems I'd wish for. And that might be one of the most rock and roll endings a band could ever have. Truthfully. All right, y'all. It looks like I went through that pretty quick. I am going to go ahead and call it a night early. I just wanted to get on here and at least do a little something with you guys because that's what I do. It is a little later tonight, but that's personal reasons. We all have lives, right? But anyway, I'm going to say good night to you, my Patty friend. I hope you're over there snoozing and not listening, you silly woman. You guys get some rest. I love you all. Check out Tuber Chat for me, okay? And I will see you Monday, 3 p.m. Ask a Bee. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Hey, don't forget I got memberships. Hey, and definitely, Super Chats are welcome. I could meet no, I can't meet it. Anyway, love you. Buzz you later.
I want to take a minute to shout out Tuber Chat. If you're a creator who's tired of surface level advice, and actually wants to understand how YouTube works, that's the space. It's real conversations with real creators who are in the trenches building channels, testing ideas. No posturing, no gatekeeping, no fake guru energy, just people sharing what's working, what isn't, and why. If you're serious about growing, learning, and not doing this alone, check out Tuber Chat. The link is in the description. If you're enjoying this show, subscribing is the easiest way to support what's being built here on BBTV. You'll see the join button right next to subscribe. No pressure, no expectations, just an option for people who want to support the channel in a real way. We're live every day at 3 p.m. Central now. And don't worry, we didn't change the heat, just the clock. And if you've got a story you want to share, send it in. Anonymous is always fine.
A boss be rising.